A holographic display hummed to life in the center of the table. It projected a tactical breakdown of the Thraxian spread, a sickening mass of red blips relentlessly consuming concordant space. Jax watched the projection, his stomach churning. The fight had been going very badly. The Thraxian swarm moved and thought as one, its hive mind making mockery of the fractured alliances within the concordance. "As you can see, the situation is dire," came a melodious voice with an undercurrent of tension. The Mognan delegate, her scales shimmering with anxiety. "We hoped the humans might offer fresh insight, a way to exploit the Thraxian weaknesses." Fresh insight was a polite way of saying brutality. Humans, new to the galactic stage, had earned a reputation during the Scarleran uprising. Humans, cornered and outgunned, rather than face surrender, they devised tactics so horrifying, so viciously effective, that the Scarleran had retreated despite the odds. The Concordants didn't want human ingenuity, they wanted that penchant for cruelty. Jax scanned the assembled delegates. Smooth-skinned avians, their avian features contorted in worry. The heavy-set Brutians, built for war yet clearly rattled. And all their eyes on him, the monster in their midst. He stood, smoothing out the worn fabric of his fatigues. "The Thraxian are a hive mind, correct? A single overriding intelligence." His voice was rough, devoid of the diplomacy practiced around the table. When they nodded, grim-faced, he continued. "Then let's talk about how to take off the head of the snake." His focus narrowed on the holographic display. The Thraxian spread wasn't a uniform mass of red. There was a hub, a nexus of activity where the blips converged far denser than anywhere else. Likely the command center of their operation, the brain of the swarm. That was his target. This was the kind of warfare humans understood, long predating their inclusion in the Concordance. Wars fought against armies, not against a tide of unending nightmares. He needed to turn this galactic conflict back into something they knew how to handle. But to get close to the brain, to infiltrate the Thraxian command center, they'd need a distraction. Something big enough, desperate enough to draw the bulk of their forces away. A sacrifice play, pure and simple, and the Concordance delegates wouldn't stomach it. They'd play defense, attempt to protect dwindling territory, but not embark on a strategy that seemed insane. It was time to take the gloves off. Jax turned to the Mognan delegate who had spoken earlier. Her iridescent scales shimmered under the soft light of the war room. Humans had fought beside the Mognan against the Scarleran, learned their meticulous strategies that favored preservation of life. She wouldn't understand why preserving life now would lead to the doom of all of them. Ignoring the looks of shock and unease from the other delegates, he motioned towards the display. He zeroed in on one of the contested systems, a system heavily populated by civilians, but strategically unimportant. The Mognan delegate blinked, her multifaceted eyes focusing on his point of interest. Understanding dawned, followed by swift horror. They needed a distraction, but sacrificing a populated system wasn't strategy. It was monstrous. Yet, as she stared at the Thraxian swarm inexorably encroaching on concordant space, she knew Jax's ruthless logic held a terrible truth. The plan came together swiftly. The Concordance forces would fake a desperate defense of the targeted system. It would draw Thraxian forces, create enough chaos and confusion for a small, elite strike team to infiltrate their core systems undetected. If anyone could pull off a strike that suicidal, it was the humans. The hardest part wasn't convincing the Concordance delegates, it was convincing his own superiors. The Terran High Command back on Earth took strategy cues from the past, from Sun Tzu as well as long-dead Terran generals. It was ingrained in military doctrine, never sacrifice what you could defend. But Jax knew that against this enemy, that old doctrine was a death sentence. He hammered his point home, invoking the memory of the Scarleran uprising, the battles fought tooth and nail out of sheer desperation. Humanity might be newcomers to the galactic stage, but when it came to bare-knuckle survival, they had a depth of experience the rest of the Concordance lacked. Finally, reluctantly, his orders arrived from Earth, permission to proceed. The Concordance fleet regrouped and massed near the chosen system, a beacon to any Thraxian scouts in the region. Their communications buzzed with fake desperation, panicked orders echoing out surely designed to be intercepted. While the Thraxian swarm surged towards the bait, a hand-picked strike team prepared for its mission. Mostly Terran, with a few specialists from allied races, they were a motley crew, hand-picked not for their tactical brilliance, but for their ability to get a job done no matter the cost. Jax was at the head of the team. No amount of convincing would keep him away from this mission. It was his plan, his brand of brutality that might ironically save the Concordance. The strike team boarded a nondescript shuttle, its weapons systems upgraded, but otherwise designed to slip through Thraxian detection networks. A ghost ship amidst the chaos of the Concordance's distraction. The journey felt endless, filled with a tense silence that Jax had learned to read over his years in battle. These soldiers weren't afraid of death, they were afraid of failure. Afraid the desperation of the Concordance, the desperation of humanity, was misplaced. As they neared the core systems, the sheer scale of the Thraxian operation shocked even him. The hive mind's nexus wasn't a ship or some command bunker. It was a bioengineered monstrosity, a vast, tumorous space station, pulsating with unnatural life and swarming with thousands of interconnected Thraxian vessels. Jax felt a primal fear, the kind he thought only new recruits experienced. Their tiny shuttle slipped past Thraxian patrols, aided by the sheer amount of activity around the hive mind's nexus. His team had trained for infiltration missions, but nothing had prepared them for this level of grotesque ingenuity. Finding a breach point wasn't difficult. The organic construct wasn't seamless. Tumors budded off its surface, throbbing veins of energy running between them. They latched onto one such connecting tissue and cut their way in, the stench of the alien biomatter nearly overwhelming in the shuttle's enclosed space. Inside, it was a maze of pulsating corridors, dimly lit by bioluminescence. The thrum of the hive mind was everywhere, a psychic hum pressing against their minds. This deep within the heart of the swarm, they could practically feel the unity of the Thraxian consciousness, a wave of hunger and insatiable conquest. For the first time, Jax understood the Concordance's utter fear. It wasn't just facing a faceless swarm, it was confronting a single, sprawling mind that thought, strategized, and evolved at a terrifying speed. Each junction in the corridors brought a brutal decision. There was no time to navigate this labyrinth. They set charges, creating controlled blasts to force their path deeper, the explosions masked by the constant hum of activity from the hive mind's core. Deeper and deeper they went, the strike team growing smaller with each corridor, each firefight against the Thraxian drones that responded. This was insect warfare taken to a horrifying extreme. There was no flanking, no complex tactics to be found in the Thraxian response, only the endless swarm protecting its queen. Finally, they reached the core, a vast, pulsating chamber the size of a small city, bathed in an alien glow. The brain of the swarm was a gargantuan mass, glistening and writhing. It was both majestic and repulsive, the sheer scale of it dwarfing the strike team. The soldiers didn't hesitate. Explosives had been their tool from the start. Rigging the charges was rote work now, the distraction they were creating far away already buying them borrowed time. Yet in the chamber of the Thraxian brain, surrounded by the full scope of its obscene power, Jax knew the true desperation of his plan. Could destroying this one central node really cripple an intelligence this vast? There was only one way to find out. Jax hit the detonator. The resulting explosion wasn't fiery or loud. Instead, it was a wave of disruptive energy, an electromagnetic pulse designed to short-circuit biological tissue. The throb of the hive mind's core stuttered, and the bioluminescence across the chamber flickered and died. Then, a scream. It echoed not through the air, but through their minds, a psychic blast of outrage and agony from a dying creature with a consciousness spanning entire star systems. The strike team crumpled, some clutching their heads, others simply dropping to their knees from the sheer mental overload. Yet through the pain, Jax could feel it. Not a death, but a disruption. The vast web of the Thraxian consciousness was recoiling. The psychic pressure in the chamber lessened, the relentless hum fading. Outside their tiny viewport, Thraxian ships that had been locked in deadly combat with the Concordance momentarily became disorientated, their movements turning sluggish and confused. It was working. In the distant distraction battle, the Concordance commanders, unaware of the strike team's progress, would see this as a sign, a faltering of the enemy. It would embolden them, let them seize the initiative for the first time in this desperate war. But in the Thraxian brain chamber, the strike team was out of time. Thraxian reinforcements were converging, drawn by the mental scream of their queen. The charges they had so carefully laid couldn't trigger a secondary explosion big enough to destroy the entire brain. Their mission was done, the sacrifice complete. Jax looked at his team, those still standing, those slumped on the metallic organic floor, minds reeling. Their eyes met his, and he saw both fear and a terrifying resolve. They weren't afraid of dying, but of this mission being in vain. Had it been enough? He turned, heading for the shuttle with the ragged remains of his team. As they cut their way back out, the maze of alien corridors felt different. The hive mind was still alive, still directing its forces, but now there was an undercurrent of chaos, of a command structure suddenly blinded and flailing. The strike team's exit from the Nexus didn't trigger as fierce a Thraxian response as Jax had expected. Some of the larger Thraxian warships were moving in their direction, but too slowly, too hesitantly. It wasn't just about physical damage to their queen. The disruption went deeper. Without their direct connection to her command, the swarm was faltering. The escape from the Thraxian core systems was surprisingly easy. It seemed the strike team's disruption had a larger cascading effect than they could have hoped for. Thraxian patrols were disorganized, their movements sluggish. It was as if the swarm's singular focus was now clouded, divided. As they linked back up with the remnants of the Concordance fleet, Jax felt a flicker of a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The sight of their returning shuttle, the impossible feat it signaled, spread like wildfire through the beleaguered Concordance forces. Suddenly, it wasn't about a last stand or a desperate defense. The tide of the war had shifted. The human strike team had delivered not just distraction, but disruption. The Thraxian hive mind was wounded, blinded, and for the first time since they unleashed their swarm upon the galaxy, they were vulnerable. Of course, the war was far from over. It would take time for the Concordance to fully capitalize on the strike team's advantage, to dismantle the remnants of the Thraxian command structure completely. It would be a long, bloody road. But as Jax stepped off the shuttle and back onto the gleaming metallic floors of a Concordance cruiser, the eyes of the other races watching him had changed. There was still fear, he was sure of that. But now it was a fear edged with a begrudging respect for humanity. He wasn't a monster in their midst anymore. He was a weapon, a terrible one, yes, but one they desperately needed. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, thinking them naive newcomers in the arena of interstellar warfare. The Thraxian had dismissed them as mere savages. The invitation to the Galactic Concordance's War Council had been a desperate gamble, a plea to embrace the brutality that they feared. But today those gambles had paid off. The war wasn't won, not by a long shot, but humanity had secured its place in the galaxy. No longer just members of the Concordance, they had been forged into a weapon the stars themselves had never before witnessed.